I have no problem with the medical use of cannabis, just as I have no problem with the medical use of opiates. If a drug is needed for a valid medicinal purpose, though, and is being administered safely, there should be no question of its legality. And if a drug that's proven to be safe abroad is needed here, it should be available. I agree that the regulation of medicines is a thicket of complexity, bureaucracy, and corporate and institutional self-interest. My basic contention is that something that's been found to be safe in a reliable jurisdiction shouldn't need to be tested again here.
Marijuana is a gateway drug. The risk of graduating to ice or to heroin from extended marijuana use is real and documented. This action by the Greens risks the health of Australians. It should be rejected and they should withdraw it, and we will oppose it.
Herb is a plant. I mean, herbs are good for everything. Why these people who want to do so much good for everyone, who call themselves governments and this and that, why them say you must not use the herb? Because it make you rebel. Against what?
Excuse me while I light my splay. Oh God, I got to take a leave from reality. I just can't drill. As a while staying with this way.
Hello, today is 31st of October 2018 and you're listening to the Australian Cannabis Review podcast. Today is Halloween and I'm sitting here dressed in a big old cannabis leaf, smoking a big old spliffy doodah, if you can all just picture that in your heads for a second. But on a more serious note, let's just get to some of the news from around the world. And this week I'm just going to focus on the markets. As you all know, it's been a pretty turbulent month for share markets all around the world. If we have a look at some of the numbers here. In the US, the Nasdaq has fallen 11%. The Dow Jones Industrial Index is down 7%. In the UK, we see the FTSE is down 6%. Japan's Hang Seng Index is down 9%. And here in Australia, all odds have fallen by 6%, which is their worst October in 3 years. Out of the 20 medicinal cannabis sector stocks that have been trading this month, 7 were trading in the green, 12 were in the red, and 1 of them remained unchanged. On a whole, medicinal cannabis sector stocks fell by 4.3% over this month. Now, out of the top 6 medicinal cannabis sector stocks, by market cap, only MMJ had an increase in their share price. That was up 14%. Also, it should be noted that MMJ have been in a trading halt since the 5th of October, meaning that their 14% rise occurred in the first week of October. And since then, like I said, they've been in a trading halt. So who knows, maybe the downturn over the month might have saved them. But I think they've also had some good news come out, so I think they're doing okay. And of those top 6 shares by market cap, excluding MMJ, they had some big declines here. So Althea, they're the new company who listed last month, they're down 35% over October. Ozcan down 30%. Medlab Clinical down 21%. Can Group down 8%. And Elixinol down 3%. So out of those 6, they had an average fall of about 14%. Just to bring out some more numbers for you, if we have a look at the North American Marijuana Index. Now, I haven't mentioned this index before, but I think it's quite a good indicator for how the marijuana market is doing in general, especially in North America, hence the name of it. So if you don't know about it, the North American Marijuana Index, it tracks the leading cannabis stocks operating in the US and in Canada. Now, the stocks trading in that index, they must have a business strategy that's focused on the marijuana and hemp industries. And they're also required to meet a number of minimum trading criteria to be part of the index. Now, if we're looking over the index right now, they're actually in their Tuesday trading session. So they've actually had a bit of a bump up. Some stocks are up around between the 5 and 12% range. So if we look at Tilray, so far this morning they're up 12%. And by market cap, they're now the world's largest cannabis company. Second largest, Canopy Growth Corporation, they're up 8%. Third largest, Aora, is up also 7.5% for the morning. So stocks have had a bit of a rebound since last time, but if we just have a look at the index over the month as well, that's fallen by about 30%. So we're sitting around the 340 mark, and now it dropped to about the 230 mark, and now it's around the 245 mark. Now, the reason this index is pretty important, I find, is because it gives a whole sphere of the most evolved cannabis market in the world, which is in Canada. And as you probably know, they legalized cannabis on the 17th of October this year. So from today, only 2 weeks ago. And in those 2 weeks, stock prices for that index and for some of the major stocks out there, because they have a higher weighting in their index, have fallen by about 30%. Now, in the middle of August, when the index was sitting at about the 220 mark, and then over the period of the next 6 to 8 weeks, it rose to its high of 350 odd. So as you can see, that index had gone up by about 50% over that time. Now, that was mainly fueled due to the expectation that Canada was going to legalize cannabis, and that they had already decided that back in June. So I think it was just investors getting in, really pumping up the sector. You know, they saw that there was money to be made. I mean, some of the values of these stocks, they're for companies that aren't bringing any money in, it's quite remarkable how much some of these companies are worth. I mean, Tilray, right? Their market cap is $9.4 billion, right? They've only been around for 2 months. They don't have any money coming in. Canopy Growth Corporation, who for a long time before Tilray came along and took their crown, has a market cap of $8.4 billion. Also, no real signs of money coming in, right? Aurora Cannabis, also $8.2 billion. So these three companies, like between them, have a market cap of over $25 billion, and they're not really having any money coming in. So a lot of their price is derived from their future expectations of what the cannabis market is going to deliver. Now, they say that the cannabis market could be worth, I hear ranges from $6 billion to $20 billion to $30 billion by the year 2020. It could grow, you know, the numbers are just estimates, right? Until we really get the hard facts come in, and this will happen probably after the first month, and we'll get a better picture, you know, after the first quarter, after the half year, and after a year. You see, we don't have a crystal ball in front of us, so we have no idea how much these companies are really going to make. These industries right now are fueled by a high range of speculation. I mean, what drove Canopy Growth's share price over the last 2 months was back in August, when Constellation Brands acquired 38% ownership of Canopy Growth. And for those who don't know who Constellation Brands are, they're a huge global alcoholic beverages company. You know, they own Corona, for example. Okay? And they acquired their stocks at about a 38% premium of what shares were trading at that time. And they bought those shares for about $48.60 per share. So that decision alone caused the stock price to go up a lot. And then over the next coming weeks or a month, Canopy Growth shares doubled, pretty much. Now they're back down to kind of the price that Constellation Brands paid for, at around that $48 mark. But that was a huge $5 billion Canadian dollar investment by Constellation Brands. Now they think that that's a good deal. They think, or they expect, that the cannabis market will continue to grow, and I think that it will. But paying that premium kind of caused a wave of other companies' share prices skyrocketing as well. And then the company Tilray, who are trading on the NASDAQ, but are Vancouver-based, their share price also went from their listing price of $17 up to around $300, and now has fallen back down to, the $101 range. And in doing so, has given them the largest market cap, as I said before, and now they're the largest cannabis company in the world, but have made no money from it. So I guess we'll have to see with time. I do think that the industry will grow, But with such huge valuations, I just don't know if I would really be putting into buying some of these companies right now. I think it's kind of like the Bitcoin boom, right? Where shares were quite reasonably priced and then they just skyrocketed. And now they're down on that retracing level. And with Bitcoin, that's happened over the course of this whole year, over 10 months' time. Now, this rise, epic rise, only happened, peaked in October, at the beginning of this month. So, I don't know, I think things really need to settle down now over the next 3-6 months, and then it'll be kind of time to reevaluate the situation. Now, something that I've done that's quite interesting is kind of made a similar index with the medicinal cannabis sector stocks in Australia. Now the North American Marijuana Index, that's indexed on market capitalization. So similar to the NASDAQ, the ASX stock market, the FTSE. However, I've done this similar to something like the Dow Jones, which isn't based on market capitalization, but is based on the share price of those stocks. Now what I did is I took the 12 largest medicinal cannabis stocks that were trading from the 4th of May 2017 onwards. So there are 2 stocks that aren't included in that, so that's Elixinol Global and Althea Group. Now, I kind of did a little comparison later on, and they're not really going to affect the index that much if we've already got 12 contenders in there. I mean, it's going to make some difference, but it's not going to be huge. And what I did as well is I got all these stocks and then I tallied up what their share price is. Then I also did a weighted version of that where I got the stocks that had a market cap of over 100 million, they got a weighting of 15. If the stocks had a market cap between 50 and 100 million, they get a weighting of 10. And if it was less than that, they would have a weighting of 5. Now you can read all this and find out the graphs and the further information if you visit the website cannabisontheasx.com. So that's the website that we're running with up-to-date information on all releases and news and articles about cannabis in Australia. Now I know this is super interesting stuff where I'm going to be talking about graphs through a voice medium, but what we can see is that when it started off in May, so the index started about 100, from about May to October, there wasn't really much change. It kind of even fell down a bit, around 25%, it kind of went up a bit over 100, then it stayed level. It wasn't until November where it really started to skyrocket, and the index went from about 120 to about 200 nearly. So it's gone up about 80%. In that month alone. Then it kind of declined a bit, went steady, and then it went up to a high of what I've got the index at 256. So to kind of put that into perspective for you, because I'm just reading out numbers on a podcast and I'm looking at a graph and who the hell knows what you are really picking up. But pretty much from that date, on the 4th of May 2017, if you bought $100 of shares across all the medicinal cannabis companies, across all those 12 shares, for example, when the 9th of January came along, you would now have $256.86. Now, when I did the weighted version of this, it was up to 286, but that is if you bought a high proportion of those, higher market cap shares and bought less of those lower cap shares. So it depends on how you did it. If you just invested in the top companies, you could have really tripled your money in that 9 months or got a really good return on your investment. But then after it peaked in January, it kind of fell slowly to about 180 in April, right? And then it got back up to about 220 at the end of April. And then since April, it's pretty much been going down pretty steadily. And if you look at it right now, if you had still had that same $100 that you invested on the 4th of May 2017, on the 30th of October, so just yesterday, you would now have only $143. So that's gone down from its peak of 256 from its peak on the 9th of January. Meaning overall that medicinal cannabis sector stocks in Australia since that time in the last around 10 months have gone down about 40% in value. And it goes to show that October wasn't a kind month at all, as that index had fallen an extra 10% on that. So there we have it. I hope you kind of followed that and what I was talking about in regards to the value of the cannabis index in Australia. Now, with the whole market outlook, I mean, right now, markets are looking a bit bearish, at least, if I'm reading other commentators in the newspapers, they're worried that the share price might go down. Who knows, it could just as equally bounce back. I mean, global share markets around the world have been exceeding expectations for the last few years right now. And if you look at the graph of, the NASDAQ, look at some of the huge shares out there, it's known as FANG stocks. So you got Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google. Their share prices have been growing absolutely massively over the last decade, since the last global financial crisis. And now many commentators expect that, there could be a downturn this year, it could happen in 2019, it could happen in 2020. We really don't know. We just have to kind of see how the world economy goes. I mean, in the US, the Fed is raising interest rates, bond yields are rising, people just around the world, or at least in these developed countries like America, Canada, Europe, Australia especially, we're kind of living beyond our means, and something's really got to go, and something's got to give. And back to these medicinal cannabis stocks, if you look at them, like I said, there's no money coming in, really, nothing significant to value some of, these valuations where they're worth, $100 million, $200 million, such as, the Can Group and Ozcan, right? So these two companies have these $100, $200 million market caps, but they're not really bringing any money. They're only spending money at the moment. So if you really have a good, long, hard look at it, I don't know. I don't think that they're really fantastic buys. But what I do know is that if government decides to become progressive, this is where the huge changes occur. Because, say for example, right now, tomorrow morning, the government comes out and says, we're going to have recreational cannabis. Okay? Now what that means is that all these companies dealing with cannabis right now, they've got an opportunity to exploit a whole other market which wasn't previously there. Right now, they can only really focus on the Canadian market. But if the government came out tomorrow and said, you know what, legal cannabis is going to happen in Australia in 6 months' time, it doesn't really matter, because what people will start doing is start looking at the cannabis stock and start looking at potential numbers of how much pot can be sold in Australia, how much people will be consuming, and that will start getting factored into the price. So if huge news like that came along, then of course medicinal cannabis stocks, as they stand right now, would go up a huge amount. Even if the government did something smaller, like actually allow the export of cannabis in its bud form, right? Because right now they can only export cannabis in, oil, tincture, resin form, or not even resin, like you can't export hash, but you can export medicinal cannabis medicines, for example. So the market would just open up greatly if we could even export bud, because people would factor in that, look at all the weed that we can sell to Canada now or other markets. Because the reason why we can't export bud right now is because, well, at least what the government says is that we want to make sure that we can meet the supply in Australia for medicinal cannabis. Now, that I hope is probably true. I mean, I can't see why not. At least if it isn't true, it doesn't really matter, because I think that's still a good point, that we need to supply our market first. And if we look around at the producers right now, I think that we don't really have a capacity where we can be exporting. However, that is in the pipeline. There are companies out there that are going to be aiming to export or not to export, I should say, rather to grow 40 to 50 tonne of cannabis per year. Now, that's a huge amount. I don't know the numbers that we need to support a domestic cannabis supply, but 40 to 50 tonnes is a huge amount. It's up there with some of the larger Canadian companies out there. So, all in all, that's been my take for this week. Happy Halloween. I'm still sitting in my bloody leaf suit, smoking a big old fat Scooby-Doo. Alright. Halloween, 31st of October 2018. And you've been listening to the Australian Cannabis Review podcast. Now, if you've got any questions, any queries, please send an email to australiancannabisreview@gmail.com. Please visit our website, cannabisontheasx.com, to get all information about latest releases on the ASX in regard to medicinal cannabis sector stocks. And I'll catch you all next time. Thanks for tuning in. Adios, muchachos.